Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and I'm here once again with a little experiment I'm doing based on, responding to academic agent's little cigar stream little bits that he's putting on YouTube and these things he's contained. Um, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I think in many ways I want to correct him. I'm not just saying he's wrong. I think he has wisdom, but the problem with the academic agent or Mr. Parvini is that he's not a political scientist. He's not really someone trained. He's an English. He studied English. Okay, he was an English literature professor. Um, and I think although studying Shakespeare and does teach us a lot about the nature of the human beings and nature of things, his own private interest in economics, the Austrian economics, led him to kind of doubt a lot of liberalism and yet you can actually see AA's transition over time from being kind of what I would call traditional kind of conservative to not. And to say alt right is a problem. I think the influence of someone like Mulbug or the influence of Curtis Yarvin on academic agent is not to be minimized. I think it's because of the cynicism. What happens, like I said in the other response, I would say he's been blackpilled. But I want to go over this thing that civilization is incommunicable. I think this is he. I think he doesn't understand this. This is where he's conflating biological constructs with social constructs. Now, I am myself trained in biopolitics, okay, but not by politics, the stuff of crap of Foucault, Gabin, Deleuze, and this postmodern wacky do people. I mean evolutionary biology. My background was, someone I was very shaped by is Roger Masters and his work on evolutionary, who was very much connected with Lionel Trilling. No, it's Trilling. It's the famous book about lions of politics. Jeremy, oh come on, Trilling and the other person. What is the name? I'm trying. I'm blanking out about the question of the moral animal, the political, this animal stuff. The idea of the work on other people who did chimpanzee politics, um, looking at evolutionary behavior and evolutionary structures of human behavior, of animals, animal politics. Again, this is what Aristotle is. This is why my interest in Aristotle, in the sense that I turned to Aristotle as kind of the first biopolitician, in that sense. And this is why I always like about Montesquieu, about the question of environment and how environment interacts with human nature. Okay, this is the famous thing. I studied work under when E.O. Wilson's initial work, Biopolitics, came out. I was very much shaped by it. Wilson shaped people like E.O. Wilson's work shaped people. I was greatly influenced by Charles Murray. Charles Murray, famous not only for the bell curve, but also his work on losing ground, where he was a liberal who saw that how liberal policy failed. Okay, also to the way these biopolitics shape criminal understanding of law. Herstein and James Q. Wilson's book, Human Nature and Crime and Human Nature, which really led to a revision of thinking about policing and led to the creation of things like community policing and broken windows theories in the late 1980s and early 90s. Wilson and Herstein's book, Crime and Human Nature, was published like in mid late 80s, if I remember correctly. I remember reading that before college, going to grad school again, and I was interested in it myself when I was at my post college life, and then before going back to graduate school, my other life that I don't like talking about YouTube about. Um, so therefore, I knew the stuff in biopolitics from a more traditional sense, even though like in the 1980s and 90s, people like uh, 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 Murray were considered racist. I mean, this is the whole or that the Canadian guy. Oh come on, that who did population genetics, who then became Rushdun, and those guys. They all were kind of uh, uh, all anyone who looked at biology and evolution and understood the nature of politics, even someone like interest in human nature, Dawkins, who is kind of, even though he is an evolutionary, he talks about human nature and this, he kind of is not, he doesn't, he backs away. His liberalism makes him deny what his science talks about. Okay, and I also followed very much the whole discussion that starting in 2010, 2012, with a discussion of so-called race realism argument, and that whole debate that happened on YouTube among aspects not of the alt right per se, but of, let's say, what we call the Carl Benjamin crowd and that whole crowd, this YouTube post Gamergate group who started to attack who embraced liberalism and libertarianism, and started to want to distance themselves from their more the right the more race realism. This what I call the neoliberal, this kind of quasi liberal uh, uh, individualism stuff. The individualists who looked at the race realists and say, "Oh, that's just collectivism. This is the what I call the poverty of the Ayn Rand view of the world, where individuals." No, and this is what the whole thing about this. This is why I'm going to talk about this then, and why this little thing he talked about here kind of shows that he's the opposite end of the. If individualism is a bullshit thing, this what he's trying to suggest here is the other bullshit thing of the, not bullshit, but the problem of it, because biosocial reality, and this is something I was again very much influenced. I mean, I was before that, and therefore when the YouTube debate about race reason, this is why people like alternative hypothesis and their attack on Kraut was a very. I mean, I minute I saw it, I said, yeah, they're right. This is not that. And my other person I became to know because of this is someone like Jean-Francois Garapi, right? And I think Garapi's work on the his little book that he wrote about the origins of human life is breathtaking. It's broad. He actually, I think he talked about the uh, I forget the title. It's called Revolution. It's going to drive me crazy. I should have taken notes. Um, uh, um, um, yeah, I mean, his hypothesis about how human how the DNA world came from the RNA world, and this kind of and what the importance of replication and an idea of evolution. But also, I've been influenced by people like I mean, I remember him. It was Ed Dutton, and then the other guy who I'm still who kind of who was an academic who was close to Dutton, but then stopped doing it completely with Dutton. Dutton's still online, and I like Ed. I know Ed. I met Ed, and we talk sometimes. We're communicating, and I like to communicate with him. He's a very nice guy, but sometimes he goes a little off, and he's a little drama. He likes his drama, and I understand that. He's much more successful at this than I am. Okay, I understand that. I'm not jealous of it. I understand that he lost it. He doesn't have a real teaching gig in that sense. Where I do. I'm not tenured because Poland doesn't really have tenure. But I've been here for over 20 something years as a teaching things. Now, I don't get to teach always what I want to teach. I don't get to teach biopolitics stuff because it's too controversial. But I keep informed about this. I know about this. So this is something I actually know about, and I think that and AA spent a lot of time about 5 or 6 years ago, not no, around the time of the crowd, just before the crowd thing, was always arguing kind of against people like Garapi's argument about evolution and biology, about the biology. He thought it was culture. He thought it originally was culture, and that ideology. He was very much an ideology man. Ideology, and the problem here is now he's gone over the deep end. AA has seemed to embrace this kind of Curtis Yarvin discussion, and maybe even be a little bit of Bronze Age pervert-ish about spirit, about biospirit. Now we'll see this in this about the question of what civilization, why civilization. incremental. So let's talk about this little script, and we'll go through, and I'll stop it.
Civilization is incommunicable, one of the most controversial uh, theses on the whole list, and one that lots of people, again, struggle to accept or agree with. But essentially, another way of saying this is one set of people cannot embody the biospirit of another set of people. And if you think of culture as being an expression of that biospirit, it is a fool's errand. It is basically impossible to expect Group B to embody the biospirit of Group A. They will always change it in some way.
Now, okay, this idea of biospirit. What is this? Now, okay, this is kind of what I call this Nietzscheization of really scientific language. We have to understand that um, the biological aspect of what is biology. The biology is that the genetics and the genetic code, and then the organic aspect, the pure organic structure. Okay, that is there. But as John Francesco Garpi always said, and I think he's right, that it's not. It's the interaction. It's a dynamic interaction between the organism and the environment that it's in. Okay. Now we have to understand, therefore, this interaction, and the interaction between this creates the organism, changes and adapts to survive and to replicate and to survive, to not only survive, but then this survival involves its replication, or creating new generations, a future children, the future for it, the future emerging out of it. And it now we also have to understand the difference between our inner nature and our second nature, what Aristotle and the classics called habits. In other words, an animal just does, we just have that instinct, not instinct, but also this, yeah, genetic drive, these demands of our body and our genetic to kind of survive, and this movement of this. But we are also an actor who has what? Memory, and we learn, and we also do what? We create things. In other words, we don't always choose things. We create processes and things that we automatically do, routines, habits, behavior habits that are not things that we intentionally choose. Again, that's another thing. We're just not driven by. We're not just mere beings driven by instincts. We are driven by instincts, but we also have the ability to choose, choice. In other words, we have the ability to say to our instincts, "No, I'm not going to engage it right now. I'm going to delay doing that because I want to. I want by delaying that, satisfying that instinct, I will be able to get something or achieve something that if I just simply did it, I would not." This is the concept of delaying utility. In other words, the demands of our body, the demands of our things gives us drive. But then the question is, well, does this can the idea is that satisfying it is an aspect of utility, but then delaying satisfaction can allow us to get more utility or different utility, right? Classic economics, the idea of delayed gratifications, delaying gratification or satisfaction in order to reinvest, to engage in something, to seek a higher level or different level utility that maybe have long-term benefit. In other words, sacrifice my immediate gratification for greater long-term benefit and long-term utility, right? This classic aspects of this is how we sacrifice my short-term immediate hunger. I get to work harder to secure that my environment that I'm able to even more successfully gratify and survive and to adapt and to able to ensure the success and survival of my offspring or my group's activity, group dynamic. So the connections of the way individuals and groups operate. Now, his point about civilization is not communicable. That's nonsense. Why? No, it doesn't necessarily. In other words, yes, a group and a thing will not simply transfer into another group, but they will adapt it. And yes, they change it, But in other words, we see this in anthropologies, that when you had tribal structures, most tribes do not have uh, written languages, or they don't have necessarily had established high religions. But all of a sudden, they come across let's say an empire that had a civilization, that had written language, it had written laws, it had established religion. So what happens? Well, they get conquered by them and they forced to adapt them. And what happens? Well, once you're forced to adopt them, they become yours, even if they weren't yours. In other words, and what happens when the empire collapses? Do you simply revert back to what you were? No, you don't. The the role of the Roman Empire conquering the European tribes, the Gauls, the Celts, the Iberians, well, even the Germanic tribes, the Franks, and those. Well, did when the empire fell, did they revert back completely to their pre-Roman influence? No, they kept and internalized aspects of Roman civilization. Christianity, which was again when the emperor adopted Christianity as part of the Roman Empire, it became part of the Roman institutions. Okay, it evolved. Rome evolved. In other words, Rome conquered Greece. Did it mean that again, this is what evolution is. Evolution is you adapt. It's not a constant. See, this is what I think he misses. That culture and civilization, and this is, I think, a mistake of Huntington as well. I think this is where AA kind of buys into the Huntington thing. Civilizations are not constants. They're constantly civilizations and cultures are constantly evolving as people are. The peoples and groups and tribes and races are constantly evolving. And when groups interact, what happens is, well, they form new communities, new agreements. They either, and the idea is, in other words, at one level, human social organization structures are homogeneous based on ethnicity and kin and blood. Okay, but in another level, they're also heterogeneous of interest and utility. What happens? Well, even when there's different groups, like the stories of Rome, if you studied history and you understood the origins of Rome and Athens, these weren't people generated from one group. They were not homogeneous constructions of civilization. Rome was founded by vagabonds, people who were from different racial groups and ethnic tribes and things like this, who the founders of Rome brought together and filled up till it became a major a city, and it became, Romulus the first king, and then after that, the kings of Rome gave it a thing. Same thing with Athens, Theseus, right? The tale of Theseus and the way Theseus emerged as bringing together these strangers and people to form people who were pirates and things like that, to form Athens, right? There's ideas of the two of the greatest cities of the classical world that formed hegemonies to some degree, or empires. The Roman Empire, clear empire, in a great empire, um, was not based upon a simply one people who emerged on it. A people emerges. Those things by intermarriage and this form a people. Okay, like like the origins of tribes themselves. So therefore, this idea of biospirit that he's talking about is nonsense. It's not simply just a biospirit. Now, this is not saying that I'm not going to be saying that everything is culture. No, culture is a culture is an expression of the it is basically kind of the group. I'm losing the word. I mean, I'm just blanking on the term. It's the idea that there's two things. There's the biological things, and then there's what humans would call it habit. These things that are things that we believe are external things of a group of culture. The things that we have, our traditions, our habits, our belief systems, like religions and institutions. That these is I think epinomo. I'm losing that word. I apologize. This is just a reaction. That's why this is hard. I should have prepared. I should have made some notes. Bad baits. But again, this is that famous debate, right? This is the debate that people like critics of alternative hypothesis was arguing that, well, this is what you're saying here is not really the genetic aspect of it, but rather the culture. This is the face of nurture, nature versus nurture. And I think Garepi, Jean Francois, was always right on this. That evolution, how to understand genes and the way they work, is not that nurture. It's not nature or nurture. Rather, it is the interaction of this, and that and that evolution is happening in two ways. Of it's happening, our culture evolves, and this is where I think Jean Francois is a little bit too much of an individualist following Dawkins, because I think there is group selection. I think group selection is nothing but an aggregate. It is not. In other words, the groups don't replicate in themselves. Rather, this is a dynamic of individual actions. In other words, individuals make groups aggregations of individuals. So yes, it's at the individual level, but the dynamic happens at a group level too. That is, it is what happens is that it becomes a distribution, and a distribution follows a certain pattern, and a group emerges because they share the same habits, they share the same external these external things that give them advantage in their individual mating practices, okay, and the group's mating practices, and the likelihood of even within in kin group, a kin group will have sometimes elements of it may sacrifice their individual genetic success for the sake of their cousins or their second cousin, their first cousin, their brother, their sister, or their or even their cousins. Okay, again, this I think this is this I think this is the big it's the debate between someone like Ed Dutton and Garipi about this group selection debate. I think it's not it's I think Garipi is right at the level of process, but he doesn't understand. I think he doesn't see the political dimension of this, because I think ultimately Garipi is too much of an individualist. Ultimately, on this, he overvalues he doesn't see how the aggregation of this. Now he's good in math. I'm not going to fight with his ability to do mathematics and statistics and these things. But again, again, why am I talking about Gary P when I'm responding to someone like AA is because AA is not a Gary P. He doesn't have the understanding about biology to make these kind of absurd claims. He's relying on this kind of Carlylean gang, who's relying not on really Darwin and understanding of evolutionary biology, but rather that French author on race, Gobineau. Gobineau. You see, Gobineau is interesting because he's bad race science. Okay, it's not really this spirit stuff. This is bad race science. This is the difference between good race science, really evolutionary scientific understandings of ethnic constructions and race behavior and how race shapes. See, cultures, civilizations aren't communicable. They communicate all the time. We societies that interchange each other. The thing about this is whether the group is formed or not, and this requires what? Groups when groups have to share a common life, that they intermarry, that they think about their future together, they believe the same things, they hold the values and community things together. They believe and adopt, and they see the benefit. Their benefit is equaling to the benefit of the group. There's the people who they're sharing their lives with. If they don't see it, they see them as the other or enemy, and that they view that their interests are at the expense of the other. Then you don't have a community. They don't see. They see these, and what happened. This is the origin of what the Greeks were called stasis, right? Of factional conflict, of strife, civil strife, and this what leads to the breakdown of a community, a political entity, or a thing. So this is why I'm going to return back to the video here, because I want to finish up this point.
They can only it's almost like trying to wear a set of borrowed clothes. They'll never be your own. You'll always be LARPing in some way, if you want to put it that way. I can.
In other words, his argument is that another group, when they take it, they borrow it, and they live action role playing. Right? This is this idea of lopping. Other person's clothes. You don't become that. But wait a minute. The problem here is that yes, he doesn't see the understand the connection between that things that we do, institutions or habits or even like that, often create habits or instill these external things that one culture has created. When another culture adapts them, they have to change their behavior in order that they are going to be able to use them and know how to use them and use them in the way that they're now they might then adapt them to, yes, they might adapt them to their circumstances, but so too is the other culture who originally had them would have to adapt them to the new situation and circumstances that they are involved in. So in other words, this idea that these are authentic ones and every group is separate and that's that again. This is Huntington's misunderstanding of a civilization and a culture. They're not permanent. They're always adapting, and therefore, you can create like the United States is not simple. The United States as a nation, the people, um, came to be. They were originally the English colonists, right? That was the core thing. That's why the Albion's Gift book, the historic but this is wonderful to understand that. And Tocqueville's second chapter of the first volume, first part volume, second chapter on democracy in America, where he talks about the point of diversion of the American of creating America, right? North America, USA, right? About where does this people come from, how what shapes them, and that what is their society, right? This is using that term, the society or culture. um, Again, this is a very important understanding of this, that this is why in some sense the American nation's diverse. America was never a homogeneous nation in a sense, but rather 13 countries, 13 nations. And then the number of states were supposed to be the states themselves were states, okay? They were not just merely subordinate units, and that there was a union in that sense. And that therefore the idea of America was an idea, something that was a collaborative, homogeneous construct, not a heterogeneous nation in the sense of Poland or Germany, or even Germany to some degree, though there was differentiation because of the different states of Germany and the different directions of the sub-tribal entities. But the idea of modern or unification of Germany through and because of the technology of the state and communications, homogenized the various European nations in this from the seventh, starting with the printing press and start first with the printing press, then the nations, then the political state, unification of state, then the radio and telephone and mass media in the 20th century. In other words, these homogenized the culture to a degree that created a more homogenized culture. Okay. And this is how this works. And this is the evolutionary product of political form. So when he says that it's incommunicable and it's yes you wear it, yes you do it, but then you use it for your advantage or you shape it, you reshape it. It becomes part of you, and but it becomes yours. You're not them. He's right about that. That this is not that. But from his own argument, this I think he does. I think he doesn't understand it. See, remember he's not a Englishman. He's not an Englishman. He is not even a Welshman. He's part Iranian. Okay, he's therefore he's not a or in other words. But then to what degree when you hear him, he sounds like a lower middle class Brit. Okay, that's a unit. That is a culture. See how that becomes a culture. How I mean, from his own point of view, he's lopping, he's larping. Okay, he's Lopper. He's not really biologically or racially Welsh, or even he's not surely not English, right? He is he's someone out of a process of different outside. His father's side is this, and the mother's side is Welsh. Okay, yes, but did he embrace the Welsh? Did he embrace the Persian identity and Iranian identity of his ancestors, and adopt their way of life and adopt their thing, or did he adopt the way of life and the environment of his in England, in Britain that he became and grew into and became a citizen of? Okay, this is what we have to understand. This process is, and then that therefore, yes, you can. You have to. This is what you know. This is why integration does work, but integration that requires adaptation to the group's norms. And yes, norms change, but they don't change and they can only change radically if you force them to, and that's very dangerous, very destabilizing. Okay, and if you do that, then it creates problems, and it leads to probably just the breakdown or death of a community. Okay, so let's finish this up, and then I'm going to just see what the rest of it says.
Never be Japanese. Uh, is another way of putting it. Civilization.
His idea that you never can be Japanese. Well, that's because the Japanese do not encourage immigration in that sense. They are a closed society. And there is a difference between an open community and a closed community. The Japanese, it's very difficult because of their situation. They don't allow those who intermarry, enter things, and they're not seen as pure. By the way, Chinese the same way. The Chinese are going to have a big problem. The biggest problem the Chinese are having is they don't have enough. They have a lot of males who don't have women because of the one-child policy, and it's becoming a heavily aging society. And what ends up happening is those who marry Chinese girls who are ethnically Chinese, these are going to be what's going to happen is going to happen in China is a kind of because it happened in America too. Remember, most of the early colonial people did not marry people that the fellow English women. They married Native Americans, significant portion of the frontier population. There were very few British or English maids, or maybe the Dutch. The Puritan settlers had the largest percentage of women in it. Okay, but then even those who went, there was not enough for the merge of the other populations who came, with mostly 70%, even higher, 80% male. Okay, and after the Puritans, the English who came were mostly male again, and a small percentage of women came. It was only until the Irish immigration of the 1840s do you have mass numbers of women. So who do they get? Where were the wives of these people? Well, they came from what few of the Protestant, the Puritan families had extra daughters they could marry, but the majority would be Indian. The native area, the women of the Indian tribes were often was seen as were as excess or be thrown away of the Indian tribes if they had too many women. That's anyone who wants to say the Indians are an ally of women's rights doesn't understand the nature of Indian life at that time or ever. Indian tribal situations are very masculine war culture, civilized warrior culture favored, and that too many women and too many, the elderly, the weak, and the women were basically left to die and starve or kicked out of things. So additional women, widows, and things like that, who found themselves outside of the tribe, attached themselves very quickly to British, English frontiersmen, Scottish, or what of the front in the frontier, and that's the mates of that. That became part of America, and this is the idea of the melting pot, right? This evolutionary structure of a civilization, how it emerges, how a culture and a people emerge, is a very complicated phenomena that involves not only biology, it involves what law, political frame, cultural things. So I thought this is enough that I wanted to just respond to this, and uh, um, I thought I would make this little video responding, and hopefully people will like it. If you liked it, like it. You didn't like, put your comments, put your response to say, hey, you are full of crap. How dare you attack AA? Well, I'm not attacking AA. I just think he can make us, if he was better educated about the nature of the biology of what he's saying, and about even the political situation, the actual political anthropology of the thing that he's talking about. And this is why I'm doing my stuff is the problem with much of the AA is better than most of the like Carl Benjamin and these guys who are just college dropouts who didn't get don't they're self-read. They're self-read. It's okay being self-read, but you don't really, you haven't trained, you haven't specialized in this. You don't really know the things. They're amateur historians. or give me if you got to talk about English history, give me a David Starkey any day. He's an expert. He knows what he's talking about. Versus some YouTuber who just doesn't really have the. He may have a good understanding of things. He may have a understand, but he doesn't. They haven't mastered. This is what a PhD, someone with a PhD, is supposed to have done. They master their field of knowledge. They have an understanding of it. Now, AA is a PhD, but in English literature, Shakespeare studies. Okay, and he kind of, I would say, his interest in economics, he got himself, I think, up to he could write a decent PhD on economics, but he's abandoned his economic understanding. He was basically using an economic historian. He became a good economic historian. I think an economic historian, AA, could have been a very good teacher of economic history. And in fact, he's good at teaching. I think AA is outstanding in his ability to communicate to others these complex, because he's a good English major and he's able to communicate well, he's able to communicate these different schools of economics very well to the people who learn. He's a good teacher in this regard. I hope I would, but then at this point, in some of these things, he's into areas where he's not doing, and he's being influenced by someone like Curtis Yarvin and that, who I think are just way outside their scope of things. Carlyle is interesting, but Carlyle is not a very useful source to understand these things. Carlyle is in many ways a reaction to the liberalism. Okay, and like any overreaction is mistaken. And I think this is what I would like to say here. Again, you can like it, dislike it, put your comment, share it with a friend. If you don't know my stuff already, my other stuff is I have had I did Machiavelli's Prince. I probably have to redo Machiavelli's Prince, but I've done a reading Machiavelli's Prince. I've had a seminar on Sun Tzu, a little bit Art of War. We read the Thucydides Peloponnesian War. We did Plato's Apology as a kind of a little reading thing. My YouTube channel, and currently I'm finished. I've been doing Aristotle's Politics, and I'm finishing it up right now at this time. The Aristotle's Politics book, the final books, and then after the Politics, I'll be turning to Montesquieu's Spirit of Laws, who I think is one of these great texts. That's my specialization, the great text of political science, as well as studying political human behavior. So I hope you join my channel. If you want to follow me on social media and things below, please look below. Otherwise, I wish you a great day. Take care. Bye bye.